Beneath the Arctic's merciless ice lies a ship that defied death itself. A warship turned explorer, a grave for 129 souls, a mystery that refused to sink. For 170 years, the HMS Terror slept in darkness. Its name a warning, its fate a riddle. Until one day, it rose from the deep, screaming secrets into the void. This is not a ghost story. This is what happens when ambition meets the unforgiving wild and loses. Close your eyes. Listen. Can you hear it? The Arctic wind carving through the ribs of a ship frozen in limbo. A ship that should have rusted away, but didn't. A ship that refused to let its story die. Here, in this vast, white wasteland, the cold doesn't just gnaw at your bones, it gnaws at time itself. And deep within its grip lies the HMS Terror. Once a beast of war, its cannons silent now. Once a vessel of triumph, its sails shredded by ice and despair. For nearly 2 centuries, it hid in the dark, a relic of one of history's most horrifying expeditions. A tomb for 129 men who dared to challenge the unconquerable. But the Arctic doesn't surrender its dead easily. And the Terror? It's been waiting to drag us into its nightmare, to show us the price of human hubris. This isn't just a shipwreck. This is a reckoning. The Terror's story begins not in ice, but in fire. Launched in 1813, this warship was built to rain hell upon enemies during the War of 1812. But ships, like people, can outlive their purpose. By 1836, the Terror was reforged not for battle, but for exploration. A pioneer, a survivor. Its hull armored with iron, its belly fitted with steam engines, it plunged into the Arctic's jaws again and again. Yet with each voyage, the legends grew darker. Sailors spoke of curses, of a ship that cheated death too many times, until death finally came collecting. A warship forged in fire, baptized in cannon smoke. The HMS Terror wasn't just a name, it was a promise. Launched in 1813, this floating fortress carried 10 cannons, each capable of tearing through oak and bone. During the War of 1812, it bombarded American coastlines, its decks slick with gunpowder and blood. But war, like all things, ends. And when the smoke cleared, the Terror faced a new enemy, irrelevance. Ships don't retire. They rot, or they reinvent. By 1836, the Terror clawed its way back from the grave. Stripped of its guns, it was reborn as a machine of science and survival. Shipwrights armored its hull with iron, as if preparing for battle against the Arctic itself. They crammed a steam engine into its belly, a heart of coal and pistons, pounding like a trapped animal. This wasn't a warship anymore. This was a predator, a hunter of horizons. Under Captain George Back, it charged into the frozen north on a mission to map the uncharted. But the Arctic doesn't bow to steam or steel. During that first voyage, ice splintered the Terror's rudder, crushed its stern, and left it stranded for 10 months. 10 months of howling darkness. 10 months of men eating rats and rats eating men. And yet it survived. Barely. But survival has a cost. The Terror returned to England a legend, not for its triumphs, but for its stubborn refusal to die. Whispers followed it. Sailors crossed themselves when it sailed past. They said the ship had a taste for suffering now, a hunger. By 1845, when the Admiralty needed vessels for Franklin's doomed quest, the Terror was the obvious choice. After all, who better to cheat death than a ship that had already done it twice? But the Arctic remembers, and this time it wouldn't let go. May 19, 1845, the docks of Greenhithe, England buzzed with excitement. 2 ships, the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, prepared to sail into glory. Crowds cheered. Newspapers called it the Grand Arctic Adventure. Captain Sir John Franklin, a seasoned explorer, stood on the Terror's deck confident. His mission? To chart the Northwest Passage, a mythical sea route through the Arctic, a shortcut to Asia. The Admiralty packed the ships like floating fortresses. 129 men, 3 years' worth of canned food, 1,000 books, silver cutlery, even a pet monkey. They had steam engines to crush ice, heated cabins, and the finest maps of the age. What could go wrong? Everything. By July, the ships vanished. No letters, no survivors, just silence. For 2 years, Britain waited. Then the rumors began. Whispers of cannibalism, stories of men gone mad. But the truth? The truth was worse. Let's start with what we know. Franklin's crew sailed north, deep into the Arctic archipelago. By September 1846, the ships were trapped. Not by a passing storm, by ice so thick, so ancient, it encased them like insects in amber. Summer never came. Temperatures plunged to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The ice didn't thaw. It grew, squeezing the ships inch by inch until their timbers screamed. The men waited. A year passed, then another. Their canned food, sealed with lead solder, poisoned them slowly. Lead attacks the mind. It brings confusion, paranoia, rage. Scurvy followed, rotting their gums, splitting their skin. And then the hunger. Somewhere in the terror's hold, a sailor pried open a can of meat. Maybe he noticed the bitter taste. Maybe he didn't care. Lead seeped into his blood, into his bones. Soon, hallucinations began. Men saw phantoms in the snow, heard voices in the wind. They argued over scraps. Fistfights broke out on decks slick with frost. Franklin, old and ailing, died in June 1847. We don't know how. His grave? The Arctic Ocean, forever frozen. Leadership fell to Captain Francis Crozier of the Terror. A practical man, a survivor. But even he couldn't stop what came next. In 1848, Crozier made a desperate choice: abandon the ships. 105 men still alive, though alive is a generous word. They dragged lifeboats across the ice, loaded with spoiled food, useless silverware, and 40 pounds of chocolate. Their plan? Trek 1,000 miles to a remote fur trading post. None made it. Years later, search parties found skeletons in tattered uniforms. Some faces frozen in screams, others missing jaws. Inuit hunters told stories of white men falling into flesh, chewing leather boots. One account described a lifeboat filled with bones, a human skull cooked in a stew pot. The Admiralty denied it, called it savage gossip. But in 1859, a single note was found hidden in a stone cairn. Dated April 25, 1848, it read, "Sir John Franklin died June 11, 1847. Total loss by deaths, 9 officers, 15 men. We abandon ships tomorrow. God save us." The last words ever written by the Franklin expedition. Now imagine it. The Terror, empty now, creaking under the weight of ice. The cabins, frozen museums of madness. Journals filled with scribbled delusions. A clock stopped at 3:47 a.m. A pair of glasses, lenses cracked. And outside, the wind, always the wind, carrying the voices of men long dead. Why didn't you help us? Why did you lie? The Admiralty had promised the Northwest Passage was a triumph waiting to happen. They'd called the Arctic conquerable. But the Arctic doesn't fight. It just waits. And the crew? They didn't go mad all at once. It happened in stages. First, the lead poisoning, headaches, trembling hands. Then the cold gnawing at their toes, turning them black. Then the hunger, sharp and endless. Finally, the silence. Men walking alone into blizzards, laughing. Others huddled in corners, whispering to ghosts. By the end, the Terror wasn't a ship. It was a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. But here's the cruelest twist. They didn't need to die. The Inuit had thrived in the Arctic for millennia. They tried to help. They left seal meat on the ice, showed the sailors how to build shelters. But Franklin's men refused. Too proud, too British. They ate their poisoned cans, wore their woolen uniforms instead of furs, and died clutching their superiority. The Inuit called them white men who starved because they didn't listen. And the ships? The Erebus sank first, swallowed by the sea. But the Terror stayed. Preserved in the ice, a perfect time capsule. When divers finally entered its hull in 2016, they found plates on tables. Beds still made. A desk with a closed journal, the ink long faded. As if the crew had simply stepped out. But we know the truth. They didn't step out. They were dragged out. By hunger. By cold. By the Arctic's patient, pitiless hand. The Franklin expedition wasn't a tragedy. It was a funeral. A funeral for 129 men, yes, but also for an idea. The lie that nature can be tamed. The Terror, once a symbol of empire, became a coffin. Its story isn't about heroes. It's about hubris. It's about what happens when we stare into the wild and dare it to blink first. The wild always wins. When the Franklin expedition vanished, the world refused to let go. For decades, search parties scoured the Arctic. Governments offered rewards. Wives petitioned Parliament. Newspapers printed wild theories. Sea monsters, mutiny, portals to another world. But the Arctic gave nothing back. Just ice, wind, silence, and fragments. Always fragments. In 1850, a British ship found 3 graves on Beechy Island. 3 young sailors buried in the permafrost, their faces preserved by the cold. John Hartnell, John Shaw Torrington, William Brain. Their bodies told a story the Admiralty didn't want to hear. lungs blackened by tuberculosis, tissues laced with lead. They'd been dead long before the ice took the ships. But the living? Where were the living? Clues trickled in. A skeleton in a rotting Royal Navy uniform, slumped in a lifeboat. A pocket watch stopped at 3:15. A silver spoon engraved with an officer's initials. And stories. Inuit hunters spoke of white men dragging boats across the ice, their skin cracked and bleeding, of campfires filled with human bones, of a ship trapped in ice, groaning like a dying animal. But when search parties followed these tales, they found nothing. Just snow. Always snow. In 1854, Scottish explorer John Rae returned with answers no one wanted. He'd met Inuit who described horrors, men so desperate they ate their dead. The British public erupted. Charles Dickens called the Inuit liars. Savages, he wrote, who smear their truths with barbarism. But Rae had proof, a bag of silverware stamped with Franklin's crest. The Admiralty paid him off, buried his report, called the expedition heroic to the last. But heroes don't boil skulls for soup. Then, in 1859, a breakthrough. A team found a stone cairn on King William Island. Inside, a single note, 2 pages stained with time. The first, dated May 1847, was hopeful. All well. The second, scribbled in the margins a year later, told the truth. Franklin dead. Ships abandoned. Survivors heading south. God save us. 24 words. That's all that remained of 129 men. But the biggest question lingered. Where were the ships? The Terror and Erebus had vanished. Not even the Inuit could find them. Some said the ships sank. Others swore they saw them drifting in the fog, sails tattered, decks crawling with shadows. Sailors swapped stories of a phantom crew, forever trapped in the ice. But the 19th century ended. Then the 20th. The Arctic kept its secrets. Technology advanced, sonar, satellites, drones. Still nothing. The Terror became a myth, a punchline, a ghost. But legends don't stay buried. In the 1980s, a team found bones on King William Island. Human bones. With marks. Knife marks. The Inuit had been right all along. In 1997, forensic tests confirmed it. Franklin's men had resorted to cannibalism. Lead levels in their bones were off the charts. The truth was undeniable. They'd been poisoned, starving, desperate. But the ships? The ships were still out there. In 2014, the Erebus was found. Its hull shattered, buried in shallow water off King William Island. But the Terror? It wasn't where it should have been. The note said they'd abandoned both ships in the same place. But the Terror had moved. Sailed? Drifted? No one knew. Then in 2016, an Inuit fisherman named Sami Kogvik told archaeologists a story. As a boy, he'd seen a wooden pole jutting from the ice near Terror Bay, a ship's mast. They didn't believe him, until they looked. On September 3, 2016, a research boat hovered over Terror Bay. Sonar pinged. A shape emerged. Not debris. A ship. Intact. Masts upright. Deck preserved. Cabin windows still holding glass. They'd found the HMS Terror, 60 miles from where history said it sank. How? Did the ice drag it there? Or did a skeleton crew, in their final days, try to sail it to safety? The ship won't say. Its logs are lost. But its silence speaks volumes. Divers entered the Terror's belly. They found desks with drawers sealed shut for 170 years. Plates stacked in cupboards. Beds made with military precision. A pair of mittens folded on a shelf. And the captain's cabin, a map still pinned to the wall, spectacles waiting on a desk. It was as if the crew had vanished mid-breath. But we know better. The Arctic didn't kill them quickly. It let them hope first. Let them think they'd escape. Then it closed its fist. For 170 years, the Terror waited. It watched glaciers melt and reform. It listened as propellers churned above it, as sonar waves brushed its hull. It outlived empires, outlasted every man who searched for it. And when it finally surfaced, not as a rotting wreck but a time capsule, it forced us to confront the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the wild doesn't just win. It mocks us. It lets us find the bodies, lets us solve the puzzle, but it keeps the last piece for itself. The Terror's discovery answered nothing, only deepened the mystery. Why was it so intact? Why so far south? Was Crozier's final act? To sail this broken ship through a labyrinth of ice, praying for a miracle? Or did the Arctic cradle it, like a predator saving a trophy? We'll never know. The Terror keeps its secrets. It always has. But now, at least, it's no longer a ghost. It's a witness. A stone-cold witness to the price of arrogance and the patience of the wild. September 3, 2016. A research ship drifted over the black waters of Terror Bay. The crew held their breath. For days, they dragged sonar through the Arctic depths, chasing a ghost. Then ping, a shape flickered on the screen. Not rocks, not wreckage. A ship. The ship, the HMS Terror, sitting upright, as if it had docked there yesterday. But this wasn't just a shipwreck. This was impossible. The Terror lay 80 feet below, preserved in near-perfect silence. Its mast still stood, ropes coiled neatly on the decks. Cabin doors closed, not shattered. Even the glass in the captain's windows remained unbroken. It looked waiting, as if the crew had simply stepped out for a moment. But they hadn't stepped out. They'd fled, or died, or worse. And the ship had sailed 60 miles from where history swore it sank. How? How does a 19th century ghost ship defy gravity, ice, and logic? Divers descended. Their lights cut through the gloom, revealing a time capsule. Plates sat stacked in cupboards. A desk drawer held inkwells, sealed shut for 170 years. A pair of mittens lay folded on a bunk. In the captain's quarters, a map of the Arctic hung pinned to the wall. A pair of spectacles rested on a desk, as if Crozier had just taken them off. But the logs? The journals? Gone. The Arctic had swallowed them. Or maybe the Terror itself refused to confess. Scientists scrambled for answers. The ship's position made no sense. Franklin's last note said both ships were abandoned in 1848, trapped in ice northwest of King William Island. The Erebus was found there, shattered. But the Terror? It sat 60 miles south, in water shallow enough to see the seabed. Had the ice dragged it? Unlikely. The Terror weighed 325 tons. Ice would have crushed it, not carried it. Unless someone sailed it. Here's the theory. After Franklin died, Crozier ordered the ships abandoned. But what if not everyone left? What if a skeleton crew stayed behind? Men too sick to walk, too mad to care. Imagine them, months after the others fled. The ice loosens. Summer sun glints on water. And they try the impossible, to sail the Terror out of the grave. They'd have fired up the steam engine, patched the hull, and inched south. Praying, hallucinating, leaving no record. Did they make it 60 miles before the cold returned? Before the ice clamped down again? Before the last man drew his final breath? We'll never know. The dead don't speak. But the Terror's engine was found in gear. The Inuit had known all along. Their elders spoke of a ship that walked on ice. Sammy Kogvik, a hunter, told archaeologists he'd seen a mast jutting from Terror Bay as a boy. They dismissed him until his story led them straight to the wreck. Science scoffed at oral history, but the Arctic doesn't care about credentials. It cares about survival. And the Inuit? They'd survived here for millennia. They knew the Terror wasn't a ghost. It was a lesson. What's chilling isn't the ship's condition. It's what it lacks. No bodies. No hastily scrawled last words. Just order. A kettle on a stove. Tools hung neatly in the carpenter's room. Sheets tucked tight on bunks. It feels less like a tragedy and more like a stage play frozen mid-scene. But the actors? Gone. Erased. The Terror's preservation isn't a mercy, it's a taunt. A way to make us wonder, what really happened here? Forensic divers found clues. A desk drawer fused shut by time. Inside, maps of Beachy Island. A lieutenant's epaulets. A cigar case. And deep in the hold, bottles of wine still corked. But no diaries. No letters. The ship's bell was missing, too. Stolen? Lost? Or taken as a final act of defiance? The Terror gives nothing away. It's a locked door. A riddle wrapped in ice. The most haunting question isn't how the Terror moved. It's why. Why did it survive when the Erebus shattered? Why did the Arctic preserve one ship and destroy the other? Maybe it's random. Maybe it's fate. Or maybe the Terror, after decades of cheating death, had one last trick. One last middle finger to the rules of man and nature. A final proof that it wasn't just a ship. It was a survivor. A monster. A legend. Today, the Terror sits in darkness. Its artifacts are studied, its secrets debated. But some truths stay buried. We'll never know if men sailed it to its grave. We'll never know what broke Crozier's mind in those final days. All we know is this: the Arctic didn't conquer the Terror. It collaborated with it. The ice hid the ship, the water preserved it, and time sculpted it into a myth. Together, they built a monument, not to exploration, but to human arrogance. A arrogance so vast, even the wild paused to laugh. The Terror shouldn't exist, but it does. And in its silent halls, the past isn't dead. It's waiting for the ice to melt, for the truth to surface, for us to finally understand that some stories don't end. They just linger. The HMS Terror doesn't haunt us because it's cursed. It haunts us because it's alive, not with ghosts, not with monsters, but with questions. Questions that claw at the walls of history, demanding answers we'll never give. What really killed Franklin's men? Arrogance? Poison? Or something older? Inuit elders know. They've always known. They speak of Tunbak, a spirit born of ice and rage, a creature that devours the arrogant, the greedy, those who disrespect the wild. When Franklin's men marched across the tundra, starving and half-mad, the Inuit warned them, "You are not alone here." But the British laughed. They ate their poisoned meat, drank from lead-lined cups. And the Tunbak? It watched. It waited. And when the men began to eat each other, it feasted. Scientists scoff, of course. They blame botulism in spoiled food, lead leaching from tin cans, hypothermia, scurvy madness. But ask yourself, why has the terror survived? Why does it sit so perfectly preserved, while the Erebus lies in pieces? The Inuit say the Tunbak spared the terror as a warning, a monument to human folly. Scientists say sediment sealed it in a cold, dark womb. Both agree on one thing: the Arctic wanted this story told. Think of the men, not as heroes or fools, as men. They boarded the terror with pride stiff in their spines. They carried pocket watches and Bibles. They believed in empire, in progress, in their right to conquer. But the Arctic doesn't care about empires. It doesn't care about Bibles. It cares about balance. And when the terror's crew shattered that balance, the Arctic didn't punish them. It just stepped aside. Let them unravel. Let them eat their own hands. Let the cold strip their bones bare. We dig up their bones and find lead. We study their cans and find rot. We read their last note and see despair. But the terror, the real terror, isn't in how they died. It's in how familiar it feels. We're still chasing Northwest Passages, still building ships to conquer the unconquerable, still ignoring those who whisper, "You are not alone here." The Tunbak isn't a spirit. It's a metaphor, and it's hungry. Today, the terror is a pilgrimage site. Researchers probe its hull. Tourists gawk at its artifacts. But the Inuit stay away. They say the ship is illicit susi, unsettled, that the crew's anguish seeped into the wood, that on still nights you can hear them. Why didn't you listen? Why did you lie to us? The British called the Arctic empty. But emptiness doesn't devour 129 souls. Emptiness doesn't laugh. The lesson isn't complicated. The wild wins, not because it's stronger, but because it's patient. The terror's crew had steam engines, rifles, maps. The Arctic had time, all the time in the world. It waited for the cans to poison them, for the cold to break them, for the silence to drive knives into their minds. And when they finally cracked, it didn't celebrate. It just moved on. We'll keep lying to ourselves. Call the terror a tragedy. Frame Crozier as a hero. Pretend the Arctic is a frontier, not a living thing. But the ship won't let us forget. It sits there intact, screaming without a voice. A machine of war turned time capsule. A grave that refuses to be buried. A warning etched in frozen wood. This is what happens when you confuse courage with conquest. Maybe the terror won't rest because we haven't learned. Because we're still here, drilling into glaciers, melting permafrost, digging up its bones for answers we'll ignore. The ship isn't haunted. We are, by the same hunger, the same pride, the same reckless itch to say, this time will be different. But the Arctic? It's still there, still waiting, still cold. And the Tunbak? It's still hungry. So let the terror float in the dark. Let its story chill your bones. Let it remind you, the wild doesn't hate us. It doesn't care enough to hate. And that is the most terrifying truth of all. Stories end. Legends don't. The HMS Terror isn't a ghost. It's a confession carved into frozen wood and iron, whispering across centuries. We thought we were giants. We were ants. We dig up the terror's bones, its plates, its tools, its silent cabins, and call it history. But history isn't a relic. It's a loop. Today, we drill into glaciers, chart Mars, mine the ocean floor. We pack our own ships with arrogance and hashtags, convinced this time we'll outsmart the wild. But the wild doesn't fight. It yawns. It waits. It knows we haven't learned a damn thing. The terror's crew carried lead-lined cans. We carry microplastics. They ignored Inuit warnings. We ignore melting permafrost. They believed in empire. We believe in algorithms. Different tools. Same disease. The disease of believing we're separate from the world we conquer. that it owes us something. So what does the terror want? Not tears, not reverence. It wants us to look, to see the captain's spectacles on that desk and realize. Ambition is a pair of lenses. It narrows your vision, makes you see glory where there's only ice, makes you kneel to kings and corporations instead of listening to the wind. The Arctic doesn't hate us. Hate would mean it cares. The Terror's crew didn't die because the ice was cruel. They died because it was indifferent. And indifference is the hardest truth to swallow. We want monsters. We want curses. We don't want to admit that the real horror is emptiness, the void that stares back when you dare it. But here's the thing about the terror. It's not in the Arctic anymore. It's here, in the way we gut forests for profit, poison rivers for convenience, melt glaciers for Instagram photos. Every time we choose conquest over balance, we nail another plank to its hull. We are all Franklin now. We are all scribbling, all well as the ice closes in. So listen, when the winter wind claws at your window, don't just hear the cold. Hear the creak of the terror's hull. Hear the whimper of 129 men who thought they'd live forever. Hear the Inuit elders murmuring Tunbak, not to scare you, but to wake you. And ask yourself, what's your Northwest Passage? What frozen lie are you chasing? And when the wild rises up, silent and pitiless, will you finally learn to kneel? The terror's story isn't over. It's yours. Tell it better.